Welcome to the CEFACT Global Trust Registry project on the evening in Australia of Thursday, the 19th of March. A quick reminder, as we all know about codes of conduct and IPR, this is a CEFACT project. That means we have certain ways of working and certain IPR rules which we need to follow.
John, you need to share screen, and you also need to approve Harman into the group.
Oh, really? Okay. I'll let the recording know that I didn't share my screen and that I need to, oh, 1 second. I need to approve Harman. Why is that not, yeah, moderator. Okay, I think I've done that. By the way, Sankishan, I've made you a moderator or something. I think you can, and Alina, I think you've got powers, superpowers to bring people in if you see people. Hey, Harman. Okay, nothing exciting has happened, Harman, except we've agreed on everything. We're just talking about IPR and code rules. We all know those, so I'll move on to the next slide. Same agenda, pretty well for all the next few meetings. We're basically going to work through the issues that we've opened and the discussion we've got on those issues and kind of remind ourselves of any changes to schedules or anything else that's sort of project worthy. What I think is possibly worth reminding ourselves of as we start is this. It is, as I started this meeting, the 19th of March, and we have a deadline that's sort of, I proposed, right? It's not hard set in stone and when nobody gets sacked or fired or loses the jobs we don't have if we don't meet the deadline. But on this page in front of you, you can see I've got a deadline of something like the 10th of April for having a set of documents that we feel is good enough to say to the CEFACT Bureau, these are ready for review. So that's only about 3 weeks from now. So we've got to kind of wiggle on if we're going to make it. If we don't make it, it's okay. We can be later. It's just that that's sort of, there's a sort of bunch of consequences that are about stuff that may happen if we kind of later and later.
Excuse me, John, do you refer to all the deliverables?
Yeah. So these are the deliverables that are, there's two key deliverables really for that deadline.
Yes.
One is our advice, I suppose, to the UNTP project about the digital identity anchor specification, how it should be modified or changed and what additions we propose for it. And the second and possibly larger body of work is the one that says, what do we propose as the design and a working model for the grid, for the Global Registrar Information Directory.
Like so, the implementation guidelines, you mean?
Well, there's a good point. Now, I think that's because Alina put her hand up a little while ago for doing those. I know you haven't had time to do it yet, so that's not very much time. So the approach I propose for all of us on this is that don't let perfect get in the way of good. We are providing documents for review by the CEFACT Bureau. We know that this will not be the finished set that are in a sense a blueprint for exactly pressing start.
Okay.
Right. What these need to be is good enough to convince people that there is value in our ideas, that there is substance in the way we've thought about them, and that there is reason to go ahead and do the stuff we're proposing. The going ahead and doing the stuff is when things like implementation guidelines and other things get defined and finalized. So we need something about implementation, but we don't need it to be
perfect.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So that reminder I've got on the screen is just really to say, the clock is kind of ticking. We set our own deadlines, but it will be good to meet a deadline for our deliverables. We don't want to keep running on forever on this. We've done a few commits, I suppose. A quick reminder of vocabulary. Whenever we do a change to the documentation that becomes a change to the website, it involves, generally, it always involves a commit. So in other words, a push request is committed to the set of pages. So I've done a few things like when I put minutes up onto the website, that's a push or commit to add the minutes of the meeting. And so there's a few things that come as commits that aren't merges because there hasn't been a body of work separately developed that gets merged in, but it's a push for a file or something. So you'll see in this list of commits any commits, and you'll see in the merged requests if there are any kind of what's been kind of merged. So the biggest merge was the one Alina and I talked about sort of 2+ weeks ago, where we were trying to make sure the way we described our deliverables matched the way the in the beginning of the project back in 2025.
Yes, the main idea was to match the sections with the deliverables.
Yeah. So that result, that merge you see here is the one that now you can see on the web pages, where there's a description of how the numbering system and the names of files and locations are all kind of mapped. So those are the merges that have happened over the last few weeks. The really interesting stuff to talk about is the issues. There aren't any open merge requests at the moment on the web pages. So let's look at issues. Now, the issues will be shown in an order that I've chosen, partly because I think with the ones we really want to talk about, probably the last three, the definition stuff. I just want to quickly alert people to what the other issues are. What I'm suggesting is not that we resolve these issues in this conversation, but that you're aware that they exist. You can comment on them, and we kind of agree how we might close them in the future. So this one that I'll first show is one that Sankashan and I have been working on, possibly me mostly, from the review Brett Hyland gave us, who's a well-known participant in these spaces, but he's works for NATA, the National Association of Testing Authorities. Anyway, he gave us some comments on the content quite a few months ago now, really, and one of those was about explaining how the flows work in trade. How does the grid get involved in trade and so on? So in this, you'll see me trying a worked example of how the grid kind of involves itself with the registrar, and then how suppliers and buyers use the registrar, and then how and all this sort of stuff as a mermaid type sequence diagram. So Sankashan and I had a bit of a chat about it. I've edited this diagram. I think it's probably good enough.
Yeah.
And it needs to go into the documents in an appropriate place. But that's open to others that wish to have a look at, to say, well, that doesn't actually make sense, John. Can you improve it or whatever? So that issue is one issue that's open. I'm going to suggest we try and close that issue, like several of them, by sort of this time next week. By Thursday of next week, we should be able to sort of have that embedded in. Similarly, that will kind of close this one, which is this whole collective issue about the way the documentation was structured and some of the contents. And these were sort of comments we got out of Brett. And you can see that most of these child items are now closed, except for that one that I just showed you, the GTR. This is like a superset. So that's issue number 32. And then this is the implementation guidelines, like a placeholder for the work we were just discussing about the need to create a document for implementation guidelines. There's also a kind of placeholder document itself, which is itself empty. I think if we open that, it'll say something like, it'll say something like it went wrong. It would say something like, this document is a placeholder and there'll be content added.
I for sure, I will sort this out by next meeting.
Thank you. I'm sure you will too. No, I know you will, Alina. Okay, the next one, just so again, you know, what's in the issue list. This is a fairly substantive one. So this is the issue that's discussing how we might, if we might, change the existing digital identity anchor specification that's in the UNTP specification right now. So this has a whole bunch of discussion, and it got quite involved. Quite a lot of interesting and useful conversations. Hans, it's probably what I don't think you've commented on this one, but it's worth having a look at this conversation. Where it really narrowed in on was discussions around things like, should a digital identity anchor have more than one registrar issued identifier in it? So a registrar like Registradores can issue a Spanish business identifying number, a number from the Spanish business registrar. It can also, because it's an LOU, issue an LEI, a legal entity identifier. It's also an LOU. It can also issue the upcoming European identifier for the business wallet. So 3 types. And Harman's aware of this sort of thing from KBK in the Netherlands, can do similar sorts of things. So the question was, should we include 3 identifiers issued by the same registrar in a DIA? Or is it better to have 3 DIAs, 1 identifier per DIA? So this is a fairly involved conversation around the pros and cons of multiple identifiers and the impact of the DID. Does the DID need to be unique for each and so on? So where we've landed, I think, is the DID is provided by I'll use the word subject hands, by the applicant for registration, as part of the registration process and part of the issuance of a DIA. The registrar will check the DID to see that it is controlled by the applicant. It might look at the contents of the DID doc that the DID points to, but in a way, it takes as a self-assertion that that's the DID that the applicant wants to use. It then wraps that DID up into its released issued DIA. Now that means the applicant can have as much as they want inside their DID doc, and it could include more things inside the DID doc, and they could use that DID multiple times for different kinds of registration if that's meaningful in a business sense for them. But
excuse me, this Steve's comment. If we can have a look a little bit again, yeah, this is more or less what I was emailing you the other day. Like, I believe that would be interesting to have like a sort of, or name it, route identifier, and then with the possibility to, or allowing additional identifiers to be included as supplementary elements. This is more or less what Steve is saying.
Yes, exactly right. Okay. So that's why when you sent, that was an email that, by the way, Lena sent to me, yes. That I said, there's an issue that's been really talking about that, and it's worth having a look at that. So yes, you're right, Alina. It's got that quality, that type of idea is being discussed in this.
Okay, so then I understand that we all agree on this position, or?
Well, I think we. Well, I'll leave the issue open. That's what I suggest for this meeting.
Okay.
Leave the issue open for a day or two, so now that people know it's there, and this is the discussion where I think we've now landed, is this idea of simple atomic kind of DIAs. But I can see Hans is thinking about it, so I don't want to premeditate.
Yeah, because I think this is a pretty important issue. So
it is, and
I have to confess, it's the first time I see it. What disturbs me a little bit is the lack of technicality, because there's only DIDs, W3C, W3C, which is the first problem. The second problem, that's probably rather my problem, is that I haven't really read through it with a weight mind. So
yeah, absolutely right. That's why I'm not closing it now. Hans, don't worry. But you
want to close that next week, do you?
Yeah. So my first point though, and as a kind of caution, yes, it's DIDs because that's in the UNTP spec.
Well, that's another problem. That's a deeper rooted problem.
Let's separate out the UNTP spec at my request, abstracted away from which DID method. It sort of said, okay, a DID must be blah, blah, blah. And it has the recognized DID methods are, and it has at the moment DID web and DID web VH. But that doesn't mean that the identifier recognized by the registrar, so the one that they release, couldn't be, but this is going to confuse everybody, a VLI, or couldn't be an EUID from Europe, or couldn't be whatever. This is
exactly.
It's like
maybe yes, maybe it would even be the European identifier.
Yeah,
so, because I'm not pretty sure that in the case of the Spanish registers, it would be our national identifier. I think it would rather be the European.
So
we're again mixing up technical levels with subject matter levels.
No, we're not. No, we're not.
Well, we are.
No, we're not.
We're not.
Oh, yes.
Hans, read
No.
And I accept
No.
my request. Read it offline, and your concern is, I understand your concern, and they're important concerns. This is not a confusion of subject and meaning. It's not.
That's not at all what I was saying here. Hang on. I'll read through it and make my comments.
Yeah, thank you.
So one more thing, John, and I even believe that this would even solve the issue or the problem that most European member states have regarding the European identifiers, so that they were mainly concerned whether if the digital identity anchor would implement a new identifier. So if then this root identifier would be exactly or precisely the European identifier, then we would solve this problem.
So I mean, there's a diagram we could show about the structure. Sometimes the JSON structures aren't that easy for others to read, but it's important that you have a look at it, Hans, and I do very much welcome your comments on it. So please do. The next one I want to draw attention to is one I think we can close. Ambitious that I am. A few weeks ago, we had Mark Lizard present to us on the ISO standard 27560, which is a standard which actually is freely available. You can get that one without paying any money, and it's to do with consent records, and it's really designed to solve a civil, a human level problem about your data being misused by data processors and data controllers and so on under the GDPR terminology. It's very worthy in the sense of it's an important kind of topic for that can concern all of us as people. But my suggestion, which I make in this issue description, is that it's not directly relevant to the trade-related documentation that we're thinking about for our work with GTR, in particular, and GRID, and even for UNTP. So again, I'd encourage you to have a look at the sort of description here. But where I'm landing with this, and I think Sankashan's come up with a similar sort of agreement, but others should have a look too, is that we think it's a worthy standard. We don't think it's a requirement, if you like, a fundamental requirement for inclusion in what we're doing for UNTP and for GRID. And we've got a suggestion of how it might be treated. That's that one. So that one I think won't require any work, but will hopefully, if people agree with that approach. The next one is really interesting, if you like your ISO standards. ISO 80116, a favorite of mine for the last 24 hours, is a standard that I honestly did not know existed, but when I read about it, I found it quite useful. It's basically a way of formatting or describing the existing national identifiers for things, companies, for example, in a way that's universally internationally unique. So it basically structures it with a country code, the UN CEFACT UN country code, full stop, then a registrar identifier string, full stop, then the identifier the registrar releases. It's an ISO standard. And it's been around for only probably a few years, and it's related to a whole bunch of stuff that's been going on to do with trade transparency. It's certainly interesting. It's worth having a look at. It doesn't change anything about what we've proposed or what we're thinking about. It just gives a way of representing the existing identifier in a string that could be pre-formatted by the registrar if they put it inside the DIA.
So is that to make every existing identifier scheme kind of international or capable of that was being internationally unique?
Yes, that was the intent. Hans, exactly right. That's the intent. That similar to our.
Yeah, that violates a good rule for identifiers, not to build in any intelligence into those identifiers. The moment I move my company across the French-German border, because I have a facility that is a lot cheaper to rent in France, my identifier would need to change.
No, it wouldn't.
Although I'm still the same entity.
No, it wouldn't need to change. It changes. So what this identifier does is it
then
says
DE is replaced by FR.
Don't look for problems, Hans. It's not a change. So if let's take your company example. If I have to register my company in the new country, which is actually usually the case, if you're a company working in a new country, you need to get a new registration in that country. All right.
Yes.
So you need to get a new one. You can't just, so there you go into holding companies or groups having many companies in them, which is also handled by these sort of processes. But the fundamental idea here is that that's
a workaround adding complexity.
No, it doesn't.
Yes. And you devalidate all the old digital documentation that exists using the old identifiers.
Slow down and read the issue and the standard. Don't look for conflict when there isn't one.
Not looking for conflict. Exactly the opposite. Easy solutions.
John, can I ask a question on this? Just a brief one. So this would work for any type of identifier. So it could be a VAT number or a business registration number or a tax, whatever. Any It's kind of universal. That's
yeah.
There's already a FR and DE in front of European VAT numbers.
Yeah. So the essence of this ISO standard is to do nothing with the existing identifier structures and decisions and determinations that they've made, but to allow the recipient to understand which registrar and which country, which is actually exactly what we want to do.
This should be in the reference data behind the identifier. Is it a French company? Is it a German company? Is it a Japanese company? Not in the identifier itself.
Well, let's just stop and slow down for a second. So I've got an ABN number. I'll give this example in the comments here for Zazu, an ABN number from ASIC, the Australian Business Registrar. That ABN number says nothing about the country it comes from, which is a string of 9 digits. And don't ask the Australian Tax Office to change their identifier standard to include something that says it's from Australia, because they won't. So what we're doing is saying whatever the registrars currently do is what they do, and what we can do is take an approach that says it does a prefix to that to say this was registered by ASIC in or from Australia. It doesn't change the identifier for Zazu at all. It just does a prefix for it. And it's a standard that we can choose or not choose to use. So we don't have to use it. It's a standard that exists and it is being used in trade documentation. It's up to us whether we want to use it or not or pay attention to it. It seemed reasonable to me. It has a consequence, though, which is I draw some attention to, I think, in this comment here, that this standard, I mentioned there were 2 prefix parts, the name of the registrar and the name or the country code. The country code is an international standard country code, and pretty well all countries have agreed to this like 2 or 3 letter code thing. And it's in the list of another ISO standard, and it's under UN control. The registrar name, interestingly enough, is registered with an organization called ECCMA. And ECCMA is a not-for-profit organization that isn't part of the UN, and that sort of becomes interesting because now there's a dependency if you choose ISO 800116 on a third party that's not part of the sort of UN fold. So interesting.
What's that called? ICCMA?
ECCMA. So you can go to this link here. I don't know if you can see my screen that well. I'll copy the link.
Yeah.
So you can find out about them from there. But it's sort of interesting that ISO has agreed, if you like, to include in their standard for this approach a dependency on a third-party organization. But that's not unusual because the LEI standard and GLIFE GLIFE is not a UN organization, but it's part of the ISO standards that talk about LEIs. So it's not unique in that sense.
Interesting to see that there is an organization that registers registrars.
Yeah. So you could say ECCMA is doing what GRID's going to be doing.
Yeah.
There is one thing that it doesn't do that's really important, or it hasn't thought about, which is that it doesn't do anything to do with cryptographic proofs. Sorry, someone.
John, yes, just a question that crossed my mind regarding what Hans was asking. For example, if you have a company registered in Spain, let's say, and then I would like to create another one in another country, like a subsidiary company, let's say, that gets its own digital anchor as well. Then the second one would have a different digital identity anchor, obviously. But then how would you link both digital identity anchors?
There's probably three. There's a legal and a financial and a sort of technical answer, right? So that there exist laws already that talk about ultimate beneficiaries and structures of companies and so on. And there's a whole bunch of financial regulation standards to try and find out who's behind the name of companies and so on. So there's a bunch of regulations that already exist that are international for this sort of question. From a technical point of view, if that organization was, for example, to use the same DID for both these registrations, they could have those two DIAs inside the same DID doc. Now, that may or may not be useful to them. They could also have two separate DIDs and have the DIs in two separate DIDs. They can prove that they control these two separate instances. They can prove that cryptographically because they hold the private keys to these DIDs and the DID docs, so they can basically prove to somebody who challenges them, yes, I control this, therefore I kind of own it.
So it's not like it's not like the digital identity anchor is shared. It's like each has its own.
Well, back to that's back to this discussion we have about the specification. The current way the way that discussion I think is finished is the idea of this sort of atomic DIAs. So that if I have these two, if my corporate group, if I'm a large company, I'm an international holdings group, I've got companies in each country, I might have several DIAs, one with each registrar of each country, and I control all the DIDs that these DIAs refer to. I could have given each of these registrars the same DID, because I'm going to whack them all into the same DID doc, or I could have them in separate, use separate DIDs. That's my decision. And Steve in particular talks about that pros and cons of that decision in his sort of logic that you'll see in that issue.
Okay.
And John, maybe just adding on, this is exactly also how we work with a lot of organizations now in the European business wallet context, exactly with this concept.
Cool, thank you. So anyway, that's ISO 9000. Now we're getting onto the really interesting ones. So we have three definitions that we want to sort of chew through. Now, I suggest that our approach to this is not to try, is to make sure we are all aware of the ideas that we're trying to resolve, not to resolve them in the discussion unless that naturally happens, but to agree that by this time next week, we'll have read through and commented and feel comfortable with what we've got inside the issue, such that we might be in a position to close the issue with an action that's been agreed. These three issues are really about the definition of terms that we have in our glossary. So the first one that pops up in the list that the order I'm popping up is the register, authoritative register definition. And Alina, a few weeks ago, came up with a proposal for a revised definition. And I've sort of proposed a way of thinking about this. And Alina, you were talking about this as we came up. What are your thoughts?
I just saw this morning. To be honest, I have to double think. But the main approach is that to keep the definitions as simple as possible. I agree with it. Of course, we don't need to include in the definitions the eligibility requirements, though we have to think about it wisely, because if we keep it too simple, then the content, where is the content? So it could refer to anything, mainly like to any sort of register or registrar of what we also have to specify to a point.
So you're so right. So right. So the way programmers often think about this, software program engineers think about it, might be a kind of building up process. So we might think of what's a registrar and what's a register. And then we might think of what's an authoritative registrar and register, and then what's a grid eligible registrar. And so we kind of like build it bit by bit. And you kind of
like I think everybody agrees on regarding the eligibility requirements that it has to be there, that has to be established by the jurisdiction of the member states. So like in Germany, the German legal frame would say what is an authoritative register. I think everybody agrees on this, that we cannot interfere in different jurisdictions of the member state. But then again, we cannot keep it that simple that we don't understand or that people don't know what exactly we refer to.
Exactly right. So there's the tension. You're so right, Alina. That's exactly the balance that we need to find. So I would offer, I've gone absurdly simple in these three, right? And I'd suggest that there's something between this and my three that's the answer. And that's the work of the next few days, is to sort of make sure we feel we've landed on something we feel is appropriate. Harman, do you want to?
No, I just added it in the chat. I didn't want to interrupt the discussion. I just wondered about this when we talk about these definitions. Do we stick to the the scope definition we had a while ago, that we to start off with just focus on business registers / registrars, because it makes it just a little bit more focused, because it's such a, I mean, there's thousands of different types of registers.
So
Harman, as opposed to what other not business registers?
Well,
no, that's a serious question, because I've been there as well.
We think the same way, Hans.
Thought about what do we exclude that could have utility if we're saying only business registers.
So the type of things that are registered are manyfold in human society, right? So so we've got birth, deaths, and marriages, for example. Do we want birth, deaths, and marriages? They're really important. They're incredibly important, actually. They're the vital things of civic life. Do we want
Let's go back to Manuka honey producers.
Yeah, exactly.
That is business.
Do we want
that is business, but
FIFA soccer teams involved in this? Do we want? Obviously these are somewhat absurd, except birth, deaths, marriage isn't absurd. But the
land registration, right?
Well, land is important.
Land registration.
Land is essential. So what we decided before
is that business land registration always.
Very much. Let's. Sorry, I ad-libbed. Two things have come in previous conversations. One is the idea of qualitative eligibility requirements. You must be founded in law in your jurisdiction. There must be an authoritative body. All these things, right? The second type of quality is that the thing you register must be somehow useful for trade. It's part of a trade interaction. A declaration of where you've reared cattle, a land on which you've reared cattle, is essential if you're going to sell meat into Europe. Because
the main problem, John, is that some people get confused when we use the term trade, because they think, oh, the land is not included in trade.
So a register.
Very good. But yes,
a register for beehives would also be business, right? Because beehives are produced or are used to home bees that produce Manuka honey.
So you're right. So ultimately, grid.
So is there
any end to this? Well, there kind of is. So
is the? I'm trying to get back to a serious conversation.
I know. So am I. So what we decided earlier, which I think is the resolution for this conversation, is two things. One, a set of eligibility requirements to describe the qualitative requirements of things like you're a UN member state recognized registrar, you have a legal foundation for your being, and this is the second type of thing, you register something of interest to the grid. Now, what is the things that are of interest to the grid? Now, I use the word trade-related documents. Quite rightly, Lena's pointed out, and others, there's lots of stuff that could be trade-related. Indeed, that's correct. So, like we did with the eligibility requirements, we list the type of trade data that we are currently interested in. That is business and land. There are many other things that will be added over time. And that process of adding over time is when we're delegating to the grid operator. The process, the board, if you like, of grid will decide what we need to include in. It could also, I offer, be the case that a registrar, a duly eligible, recognized registrar or UN member state may say, I'd like to include the following in my list of registrars. And I don't know why the grid would refuse that if it meets the eligibility requirements. So it could naturally grow, okay? There doesn't a need for us to constrain it other than simplicity to start with. It'd be ridiculous to open it all to everything. And so
I think it makes sense, John. Just one thing I just want to be clear on. So I do agree that, for instance, land makes a lot of sense, right? But I think a while ago we were discussing, like, just to for the sake of simplicity at the start, we may just focus on businesses. Is now the kind of consensus that we indeed don't include all types, but we do include both businesses and land?
I think we get a very, very useful additional quality of a thing. I want to go. I really do actually want to, because it's very useful, go back to what Hans has been describing, one of the other sort of definition areas. This very important idea of what does subject mean and who is the holder of the thing in the DIA and the verifiable condition. This is the sort of concept. Now, when we talk about land, It might be that a company is recognized as the owner of land. It might be that a person is recognized as the owner. There's a lot that Alina could say this much more eloquently than I can, but that land is a very interesting thing in the sense that the way its ownership and control is viewed, and that means that we will have to think a bit about DIAs.
I'm sorry, Herman, but I would have to disagree with you in the sense that in the scope of the project are all authoritative registers. So we cannot create definitions only for trade or business registers. So we have to create one to include all. And then
I don't disagree with it, Alina, but my point was the discussion we had a while ago is that if we have such a broad scope, then we could still decide on a first step that focuses on something. But if the consensus is we have to do everything, it's fine, but I think it's quite a challenge.
Yes, I agree. And actually, I don't know if I can share this.
Yeah, please. I'll stop sharing if you can share. Want to share something?
Yeah, I wanted to share something, which is an email that I saw from. Wait a second.
You should have the share, the power of share, or whatever it's called. Yeah, here it comes.
Yes, this email from Sankishan. Then I would like to ask him, because he's introducing here a third concept, the register operator. I think it's already refers in the other two. Like I think that the third concept, operator, is already one of the two above, and I don't understand exactly what he refers to on one hand, and on the other hand, when he refers to the second definition, authoritative register, he says that the system of record established under the authority of a jurisdiction, whatever, that maintains and publishes identifiers. I think that the main role of a register is not to publish identifier. It's like an additional role, actually even a recent one. It's not the traditional or the main role, let's say, of a register to publish identifiers. So what I see here is that each of us understands something different when we refer to any of these concepts, and of course our understanding depends on our or on the jurisdiction of our national countries or legal frames, let's say, because I imagine, for example, in India the registry system is one, in Europe that again is different, and I think we should harmonize somehow and agree on the idea of these concepts. Otherwise, we will never reach an agreement.
I personally know Sankishan's been up for many more hours than is good for him, so I'm not sure if he's still able to unmute and answer.
I'll just quickly respond to it, but I'll also mention that the clock is running out for John. By the way, this update or a comment from me was actually trying to highlight that all of us are the line just before it where I say that we are looking at the same issue, but we are blending the three concerns. I wanted to use a thought experiment to try and see how we can tease out and separate them and try and land on a simple version of a definition. These are not the definitions I'm proposing. I'm just putting them out as an example that we could probably use a way to simplify.
Thank you. I do agree with John that we have to separate the definition from the eligibility requirements.
Cool.
This for me is pretty clear, not to make it too complicated.
And Alina, I've got good material for other conversations I know you've been part of for example, in the German company registration process with the many registrars, theoretically. So I did a bit of better research on how various countries register companies, their processes and so on. And that's in this document that this is the research. I'm just going to put it in the chat. It's inside one of the issues, the issue that talks about ISO 8000. And the document I've just given a link to, you will have access to, and it talks about how countries like Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Singapore, the Netherlands, Spain, how they register companies and the legal basis upon which they do so, and so on, and how the unification process of countries like Germany and even countries like Australia does get a unified country register out of state-based or province-based or court-based. So okay, so that I think these
Thank
are
you, but I think that the first step, John, is to decide, because we still didn't decide what exactly, to what authoritative registers we refer, because we were then again talking about the honey register, land, business. So first of all, we have to agree what exactly do we want to include in the grid. Before considering the definition, the first question would be, what do we want to define?
So my personal feeling is the kind of registrar and register, the kind of register I want us to be thinking about when we're constructing these definitions is a register of land or a register of companies, that type of register. But I don't want our definitions to be constrained by that type. So I don't want our definition to say it is either a land or a business register, because that condition, that criteria is much like the eligibility requirements, better put elsewhere. A register is a register. That it is authoritative is because of other things.
Yes.
And the idea that a register is operated, managed, whatever, by a registrar, I think is important, and it's a good separation of duties and things. I want to close with an example, which I feel like I'm opening up a can of worms. But in Australia, in Victoria, the state that I'm in right now, the Victorian government sold the driving license register responsibility to a banking group called Macquarie for $8 billion Australian, as it turns out. And what that means is that driving licenses in Victoria are issued by Macquarie Bank as Vic Roads, operating under a license from the Victorian government. Now, the Victorian government is still the registrar, right? They're the authority upon which, the legal authority upon which licenses are issued in Victoria. But the operator of the register, to use the words that Sankashan used, is Vic Roads, which is in fact owned by Macquarie Bank. So that's where you potentially get this idea of delegation of authority or responsibility to run a register being given to a third party, but the authority still vests in the legal body that's recognized under law. And that's actually part of the subtleties in some of the laws that each of the countries have written, is about whether or not the body is allowed to second out services to others. Anyway, as simple is the
coming
idea.
back to the definition, if I would have to pick up like a few words, let's say that are pretty relevant for me for an authoritative register, that would be authentic source of information. Yeah,
I think that's a good quality that we want to ensure is true. I think there's for me, those are things that I test them in my mind about whether that becomes an eligibility requirement or becomes a term that we want to put inside a definition. I think that's what I offer. The way we think about these things is. I agree. Which part it belongs somewhere. Where do we put it? I saw a really good one from Anne Rowe in the comment section on one of these issues, which was she came up with public accessibility. Now, if you think about it, if we don't use that idea, it is potentially possible for a UN member state to offer their registrar as a participant in the grid. It's authoritative in the sense that it's legally recognized.
Established.
But in fact, it keeps everything secret. Just imagine this is the case, right? It keeps everything secret, doesn't tell anybody anything. Now, that wouldn't help our case for transparency goals of UNTP. It would be true that they are the registrar of that country.
Yes, of course. Actually, we have got an article in our Spanish legal frame which says specifically that the register is public, which does not mean that you can access the information for free.
Okay, yes, so that's very yes, exactly. That's a very
we have to distinguish between public and for free.
Yes,
Like-
that's a very good point. Yeah, and I think that's an important example of the sovereignty of a registrar. You know, that it's up to the operating model as to whether or not you charge for this. That's not that we will not impose that condition. We have no right to impose that condition from the grid onto registrars. But the idea that to the extent that it's possible, the information is accessible, or whether you have to pay for it is a different question, is true. Anyway, that's our I hope our homework, and I know that there's stuff to read through and think about, and there's some really good conversations in these issues. And my encouragement is let's work on that over the next few days, and hopefully, kind of asynchronously, we should be able to get to I hope a good conclusion by say this time next week.
Next week or in a couple of weeks?
Well, I'd like it to be this time next week. So what I would like to be the case is that when we next have our meetings, these issues have been to our general agreement.
Oh, yes, we will do our best.
Yeah, I mean, if we can't, in a sense, the meetings like this should exist to explore the issue because we haven't been able to explore it in the sort of written thread, right? Or to say yes, the written thread is exactly we're all happy. Let's sort of close the merge the issue, because you and I, Alina, by the way, have the ultimate power to just merge anything we want into the content.
Happy to hear that.
Be dictators, but I don't want to be.
I was joking. No, of course I would like to listen, or at least take into account everybody's opinions. That's why we want people to join and participate in this project in the first place, and we are open to more comments from everybody.
Yes, and there's a time limit.
Yeah,
it kind of has
there
to
is a deadline. We have a deadline, unfortunately.
Yeah. So that's it, I think, from me this week. I didn't leave much gap for any other business, but is there anything anybody wants to sort of draw our attention to that we haven't shared so far as about what we need to do or think about?
Not for me. I think you have a birthday party, right, John?
I should get back to other events. Yes.
Happy birthday to your wife, John.
Thank you very much, guys. Okay, and with that, I'll thank you all. Then I'll stop the recording, and we can carry on with our days.
Thank you, John, and all. Talk to you later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye. Thank you, everybody.
Trying to find out how to stop record. Oh, come on. It's really annoying, Alina. What is it there? This is not behaving. So I'm just gonna
What is
do
going
this.
on?
I'm gonna switch it off like this, and it will tell me. Just leave the call. No, I'm gonna do. Okay, here we go. Recording. Stop.